No se escucha en la cabina, pero me...
Need a couple of helpers. Okay, so just wanted to do a little fun this morning with you guys, if that's okay. So let's start with again looking around you. You can do a little namaste hola with your neighbor. Hola, namaste hola. Okay, so let's do a little.
Bueno,
we have
entonces,
you all know yoga.
¿saben algo de yoga? Ya han hecho
So
todos
let me
yoga,
tell you
¿verdad?
first,
Entonces,
in
primero
India,
que
we
nada,
actually,
en
the
la
right way to
India,
say it
la
is
forma
yoga.
correcta se dice yoga, ¿eh?
So
No se dice yoga.
if you want to look like a gringo, then say
¿Quieres verte
yoga.
como gringo?
Otherwise,
Yoga. Si no,
it's
dice
yoga.
yoga.
So there's something called laughter yoga.
Algo que se llama
So
la
we're going to
yoga de la
do just
risa,
a little
yoga
of
de la
that
risa.
to kind
Vamos a hacer un
of
poquito
get
de
our
eso,
bodies
como
up
para
and
que el cuerpo se
connected.
despierte y
So
se conecte.
let me just
Entonces,
start with a
vamos a
little
comenzar
stretch
con
up
un poquito de
high.
estiramiento hacia arriba,
Really high, as high
estirando
as
los
you can, on
brazos
your
hasta
toes.
arriba, alto, alto.
And let it go.
Soltamos.
All right. And touch your toes
Tóquense
all
los
the way
dedos
as
de
much
los
as you can.
pies.
And up. And there's something I call, since we're in Mexico, it's called, you have to
¿Qué he visto?
pick up a glass,
Que recoges como un
loosen your wrists a
vasito.
little, and give your neighbor some laughter mezcal.
Vas a dar un mezcal a tu vasito. Vamos a darle mezcal de la risa.
And I have this, my daughter keeps telling me my jokes are really bad, so I apologize in advance.
Entonces me disculpo a su nombre, pero
And let us give a laughter hug to our
también
neighbor.
un abrazo de la risa.
Vamos a dar ejemplo para que se vea. I gotta finish this.
I want everyone to put your hands up, and we're gonna say, give a laughter degrowth. We're gonna say degrowth and start laughing. Degrowth! 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 So as always, I think we're learning something I've learned from many elders over all these years. If we can't laugh at ourselves,
Es que
we
si
will
no
never
nos
grow as a
podemos reír
movement.
de nosotros
So,
mismos, los demás nos ganan. Hay que reírse de uno mismo.
So let me say first, thank you for
Primero que nada,
inviting me.
quiero
I come from
agradecer por la invitación.
Rajasthan,
Yo vengo de
to the
Rajasthan,
magical land, mystical
a la
land,
tierra
which is
mística y
about,
mágica
it's the northwest side of
en la
India,
parte noroccidental
very, very
de la
far from
India.
here, but
Muy
whenever I step into Mexico, I feel like I'm at home because there's a lot of similarities. You can feel the ancient, people say, somebody once said to me, without globalization, how will people meet and connect to each other around the world? I said, we've been doing it for thousands of years. So this connection between India and Mexico is a very, very ancient one. And where I come from, actually, corn is also one of our main staples. So we have hundreds of dishes also out of corn. We have our own version of tamales, sopes, and things like that. So what I'm going to talk to you today about is what I would like to contribute to the degrowth movement is our work around de-education or unlearning. And I think it's a very important element which we have been working on for the last 20 years in India. But I want to start by saying that for me, degrowth is not about theories and declarations and PowerPoints. It's about our lives, our own choices, and our stories. So I want to start with my own story a little bit. So I was a victim of the growth paradigm. Survivor, luckily. but a victim of it. When I was born in India, and when I was 3 years old, I was kidnapped and uprooted and taken to America to pursue the American dream. And when I was growing up, I developed a lot of self-hatred towards my community, towards my culture, towards my language. I was always kind of trying to be white. And I remember from my childhood, I was just thinking about this morning, it came to me after so many years, I had kind of, I spent hours and hours looking in the mirror and trying to imagine what if my nose was more European looking. And luckily I didn't have to opt for plastic surgery, so I'm okay. And I also was taught by my schooling that using my hands, doing things with my hands, making things with my hands was drudgery, was a form of drudgery, was actually inefficient, because I should be using my mind for many more great things in the world. So I kind of always grew up avoiding things with my hands. I was also taught that nature was dangerous and dirty, unhygienic, and so it was better to be in the safe and hygienic confines of shopping malls and playing video games and drinking Coca-Cola. So this was a lot of my childhood. I spent a lot of my life, the first part of my life, believing that wealth, happiness, well-being is something that was out there, something that I had to buy. I was in a generation that was taught greed is good. There was a movie, some of you remember, that came out in the late 80s called Wall Street. I was taught that mobility was the key to success. Leaving your community was actually where success lied. I was taught that ethics were to be determined by Excel spreadsheets. And I really thought for some time that I could beat the white man at their own game. But luckily for me, like all good Bollywood stories, there's a twist. So I mentioned I grew up in a community, spiritual community, a tradition called Jainism. And it's more than 3,000 years old. And the question that was always in our lives is, what is a nonviolent, non-exploitative life? We've been growing up with this question. And the Jains, I can tell you, many of them came from either warriors or traders. They were always people who were around wealth, gold, different kinds of, grains. They had control over a lot of those things. So even at that time, there were quite a few questions around the ethics of all of this, of this wealth, the material wealth that was accumulating. So one of the things that I grew up seeing was our monks, who actually are... Hello? Yeah. So one of the things I ended up seeing was our monks, which were, who actually, in their processes of initiation, would give away everything. So it's called Diksha, and it actually is an amazing thing to see, somebody, I saw it once I was a child, a diamond merchant, super, super rich, and giving everything away. And I couldn't understand it then when I was a child, but it created a crack in the narrative. It said that there's something beyond just the accumulation of wealth, the greed is good narrative. There's something actually that lies beyond that, and that created a kind of curiosity for me. That the purpose of our lives might be something greater than what capitalism tells us. So in Jainism, we believe that life is interconnected, and we say that let us try to live simply so that other beings, human beings and other life beings, may simply live. And initially I thought that was like, I connected that's living simply with kind of poverty, right, of existence. But luckily for me, my connection to Jainism wasn't through abstractions or texts or things, it was through my grandmother. And from her I learned that living simply can be a very joyful, convivial activity, and that there's something more than just, living simply as a form of poverty. So she gave me a lot of, she introduced me to the idea of a distinction of what I call knowing versus being. And so she was never giving any lectures about living simply. She was just living all the time. And it was up to me to live with her and learn with her, or unlearn with her. She was one of my greatest teachers. The other person who was very influential and also was brought something very deep from Jainism was Gandhi. And he connected this, he gave actually my vision of Jainism connected to a political and systemic perspective. That it wasn't just how we live, but there is also to start to look at the larger systems and the larger politics and structures which drive those. So I have to say one thing, that if you come to meet Jains in India, you'll find in many cases many contradictions today. And this is the contradictions and confusions that modernity creates. But there's these seeds within us, which helped me at least end up from an investment banker on Wall Street to a degrowth activist. So, and there's a few things in these seeds which I think principles that I've seen in practice, which are important, I think, for the degrowth movement and any movement which is trying to challenge development and capitalism. So in our community, there's actually a very beautiful active discourse and practice of setting limits. So, and this is discussed all the time. My uncle was just with me last week, and we were talking about that. He has a limit of, he only eats 10 items per day. Like, he's very particular. After that, he'll just start fasting if he reaches his limit. So there's a very conscious practice of setting limits that still lives in our community. There's also a very conscious practice of interrogating technology, which I think is very important and starting with interrogating its ubiquity. It's ubiquity everywhere. And does it need to be everywhere? Where do we set our limits with that also? And I think embedded in that is that, there's this practice of a discourse of questioning these techno-utopian fantasies, which is still very alive in our community. And there's a strong tradition of empathy, trying to see life from the perspective of the other. And the last thing is there's an active discourse around the roots of violence. And one of them that is very strong and has really stuck with me is the question of ownership. Are we really owners of anything? What does it mean when we set up life as a commodity to be owned? So this is a very strong discourse which still lives despite all the contradictions. So let me, how are you doing? 2 minutes?
10 minutes, yeah.
That's it?
Sorry.
Oh my God. I had unlearned time many years ago, Western time, so still struggling with that. So when I end up in these places, I have serious challenges. But anyways, let me see. So I think basically the planetary crisis we're facing indicates that is actually indicating the limits of human reason and rationality, and that we need to open ourselves to other senses, sensitivities, sensibilities to expand our notions of the self. Capitalism has really created a reductionist of the self. And what I'm arguing for is that changing the content, as part of the degrowth narrative and to reclaim wealth and well-being, real wealth and well-being in our communities, I would propose we need to dismantle the monopoly and legitimacy of the university. Yeah? And this is to really say that it's not sufficient today in the world to just say we can change the content and have a subject on degrowth and everything will be great. We need to fundamentally change the structure, the logic, the assumptions, and the economics driving the university system. And so one of the whole reasons that the development growth narrative exists and continues to grow and occupy people's minds and hearts is because of the white man's burden. Right? It is our job to civilize the other, to take them out of darkness into light. People in India still use this language. Many of the educators and NGOs and even activists, left activists, will use this language. It is also our moral duty to give jobs today to people. So this also grows out of the same logic of the white man's burden. I would just want to say that I have been part, the last 20 years, of creating a radical alternative university, Swaraj University. It's in India. And before I say that, one other thing. We have to be, there's some assumptions, right? The learner in India, we say, there's a lot of assumptions around education, right? The learner is a human resource, right? Learning and knowledge is a commodity. In India, the education system is under the Ministry of Human Resource Development. That's what it's called, right? So they're very upfront about it. And accumulation, I would want us to note, somebody was saying to me, the days are really full. I said, yeah, there's many forms of accumulation. So accumulating as much knowledge and information here is another part of the same sickness. We should be aware of that. The other assumption that learning happens with teaching, with classrooms, best in institutions. In India, they use a term to call kids who start going to school for the first time, they call them first-generation learners, which means that before schools existed, nobody was learning anything. You cannot learn anything in life without schools. So, and another assumption is that text trumps experience, right? So experience is secondary. What we need is tests and exams, and that becomes the primary motive. So we started, one thing I wanted to leave you with, a question is, what is our image of an intellectual in the degrowth movement? And are we carrying the same images from the capitalist university into our spaces of intellectual? And one of the things that I would want us to question in that is the idea that intellectualism in the Western tradition comes out of a paradigm of leisure, right? That we can sit around all day not doing anything and be intellectuals. And the other assumption of that is that people who are working with their hands, their bodies, in connection with nature, just because they don't read all the texts and they can't cite everyone, that they are not intellectuals. I mean, one of the most painful things that I had to unlearn was I was taught that my grandmother is uneducated. Right? So I think the idea of Swaraj University is an idea of it's a degrowth university, and there's many, many parts of it, but one of the things I'll say is that we have a campaign in that called Healing Ourselves from the Diploma Disease. So I invite you to be part of that. The idea that first that the people with diplomas may not be the best people to support new models of learning. To question that, right? And also to say that we don't necessarily
Bang over.
Did you do that? You pulled the plug out.
Eres tú, ¿verdad? Me estás haciendo, lo estás haciendo
So
a
I'll wrap
propósito.
up. Let me just say one
Bueno,
last
para
thing. There's
concluir,
a lot
una última
more to
cosa.
share, but I wish I had more time to share.
Tenemos nuestra ecoversidad, que es un programa en el que buscamos conectarnos. Muchos de los temas que hemos hablado en esta conferencia son lo que nosotros buscamos en nuestra universidad, ecoversidad.
Paradigm which is based on isolation to a paradigm which is based on relation. So I'll just end it there.
Puedes hacer unos comentarios mientras se conecta. Nos dan.
Take advantage of this little time.
Okay.
I have so many things to share and I didn't get to. So I think the divine energies listened to my and gave me a few more minutes. I think this is not working. Maybe they don't want me to speak. So let me just say a couple more things. So I think in the post-growth university, these questions are fundamental, right? The spiritual questions of who am I, who are we, like even this PowerPoint with us, who are we, and why are we here? Why are we on this planet together? These are kind of fundamental, I think, questions which have to be part of the post-growth university. And not only, I mean, one way is to read about and talk about, but in very experiential ways to reclaim that. This idea of the, in many of the ecoversities, where one of the common conversations is, what is really the self? What does it mean to engage in reclaiming our bodies again, our heart? Gandhi talked a lot about this, right? That the kind of post-colonial education should have been something involving the head, the heart, the hands, and the home, right? And we decapitated ourselves post-colonially and stick with only the head. So the idea of the post-growth university is to reconnect to that. The second piece of that is, so we're told, like when I was starting this with friends, somebody said, oh, you need to have at least $10 million to start this, an alternative university. And I said, well, we don't have any money. So we're going to rely on the ancient technology of gift culture, and we're going to create a gift culture university. So in our university, we have more than 2,000 faculty mentors, all working with us on the spirit of gift culture. We have a 30-acre campus, which somebody is letting us use. It's an organic farm in the spirit of gift culture. Now I say we have at least 25 campuses around the country. People have beautiful spaces. They said, come and use this for this kind of mission. So we've built this whole initiative really in the spirit of gift culture. There are no fees in our university, right? But there is we invite a sharing of gifts. So people hold the gifts that they receive with sacredness, and they understand that the gift has to move. It has to keep moving to stay alive in us. Another big piece of the university is localization. So how do we actually reconnect ourselves to our own local production and consumption processes? How are we aware of where is our waste going? Are we involved in building our own dormitories? Are we involved in creating our own clothes or making our own soaps? So much of this is also, this kind of localization is very much a part of the processes in Swaraj. The third piece is what I call community living. So many of the people, we've forgotten how to live in community. And there are many dimensions of that, but I want to highlight one part is conflict. How do we see conflict in community? So we would see conflict. We've started to shift. Many people, again, in the technocratic regime say you have to manage conflict or eliminate conflict. We said we have to see conflict as a gift. And how do we invite conflict? Living together will create conflicts. And how can we start to see them as very deep gifts to our own, again, understanding of ourself, our shadows, our connections with the other. Another part of the community living is really actively commoning. How do we enter into active process of commoning our spaces together, of our processes of living together, and rebuilding that? So that has many things. There's one thing we created, very beautiful, called the, it actually connects a lot to Jainism, called the Shop of the Open-Hearted. And it's a gift culture shop. Expansive, Darya Dil means expansive heart, you know. And the idea of that is that we each bring things that we hold very dear and sacred, and we offer them as gifts to each other to move. So that this idea of attachment, like there's a continuous attachment to material things. So how can we enter into active processes of releasing those things? So people have like taken a ring their grandmother had given them, or their most favorite shawls, which have a lot of, which has traveled all over the country with, offering them as gifts for each other. So there is this idea of how do we expand our notions of the commons in different ways. Are you wanting me to stop?
We would like to have some
questions.
from
Okay.
the people.
Perfect, perfect. So that just gives, I think, a flavor of.
Sí, estamos
perfect.
esperando la conexión de Canadá.
Just the last thing I'll say, one of the essential principles is copy left. So that's the last thing I'll share about the Swaraj University, and many of the things as we're talking about copy left rather than copy right, and actively promoting a discourse.
Ambos.
Yeah.
Bueno.
I told you the first day I create confusion and disruption, so we're a bit confused right now, sorry.
Sí. Aprovechemos si hay preguntas para Manish o para Joan también.
Quiere. Bueno, vamos a dejar
Sí.
a Ulrich que entre ya.
¿Quién? Entre Ulrich.
Sí.
Okay.